Good morning and welcome to another lecture in the Dawn of the Data Age series. Today we're covering identifying personas with Agile Research. For those who are joining for the first time, I am Luciano, the founder and CEO of Emperitas. We're a team of economists and data scientists doing customer lifetime value intelligence. I'm also the founder and director of the Utah Community Research Group at the University of Utah. Today's lecture has three parts. We're going to go over the benefits of using personas, and I will make the distinction, like I have in the previous lectures, between a profile and a persona. Then I'm going to show a persona template, specifically one that we use here at Emperitas, and then the supporting data around it, so that you can get a picture of the kinds of information you could go get to build your own, and a template to use to start. And then explain how to base these personas on behavioral data, some that you may already have observationally, and some that you may be able to go get through research. As usual with this lecture series, I prefer to just answer questions as we go. If you have them, put them up in the chat window. We do have people watching that. You can unmute yourself, you can ask it, interrupt me. Ask the question at the moment that you're wondering, because other people are likely wondering as well. We will have time at the end, though, to answer some of these questions, but like I said, I prefer to do it as we go. So why go to the effort of using these personas, which is a decision most companies right now are making. Do they want to do this or not? They're not doing it. They've been guiding their organization on averages, and not even just averages, but financial averages that are aggregated at the end of the year. They might have some quarter-by-quarter insight, but it's guidance by the highest level and in some ways easiest to get key performance indicators. And I've made this case before why using averages is a really bad approach. It masks a lot of what can happen in a bimodal distribution, and something that isn't normally distributed, and that shows up a lot. So how do you move beyond those averages to understanding the individual? And this is where personas come in. It's a first step, it's not the end step, but most organizations haven't built these yet, or if they've built them, they're within certain teams, but the rest of the company doesn't know they exist. So why should you go to that extra effort of doing it? Because this is definitely one of the more important lectures we've given. This is, again, like last time, something you could go, last time meaning the touch points, you could go in that afternoon start to have a system developed. And you should, because there are huge benefits. Long term, and I said this is a stepping stone, you should be trying to understand each customer as the individual that they are. That gives you the ability to customize your interaction with them along their entire customer journey, which when you go through this effort, it's just optimization at every single level. Optimization in your marketing efforts, optimization in your sales efforts, optimization in your product development, optimization in your customer experience management. Because you understand their individual paths better. Right now, like I said, everybody's just guiding from these top level averages. So personas are one step closer. It's not just that you can understand them better, it's that this does translate for you as an organization into profit. Using personas instead of using an aggregate average means that you can individually tailor things like product offerings and pricing and capture more willingness to pay. Customers want to pay for things that solve real problems for themselves, whether they're a B2B customer or a B2C customer. If you have something that really solves their problem, look at Apple. People stand in line to get the iPhone. I had a student at the University of Utah who told me that every time an iPhone comes out, he makes $3,000 because he goes and stands in line and there's some limit on how many you can buy. And he basically just does arbitrage. He just finds people who don't have the ability to stand in line, but do have the extra money and want that phone first gen right when it releases. And so they pay him, and he pays his tuition with that every semester. That's real value. That's not exploitation. Profit gets a really bad name, especially today. Economically, profit is the same thing as cost minimization. So if you look at the problem from the idea of we want to do the most with the minimum amount that we have available, we don't want to waste anything. That is mathematically identical to the idea that you want to profit maximize. And I'm not talking about profit that comes from fraud. I'm talking about profit that comes from solving real problems that people have a high value for. If you do that for your customer, at the persona level, you will see an enormous increase in willingness to pay and willingness to recommend among your customers. And then that will translate to you, if you're wise about it, if you're guiding it with the right data, that will translate into profit, not just revenue, but profit. And you have to be focused on profit. You have to remember that profit is total revenue minus total costs. And so if you think about your unique job role and your department that you're siloed in, and the portion of the customer journey that you're touching, and you start to look at that whole process, can you make decisions right now with information that are profitable, that are not revenue-based or cost-based? That's only one part of that equation. But that you can say, on the whole, we put this amount in and we get this much more out. And most of the time the answer is no, you can't do that. And that's because the information that you need to base that decision on, customer lifetime value, has not been calculated. It's just one of those giant gaping holes in organizations right now of all the key metrics that should be guiding these things, because it's useful for marketing, it's useful for sales, it's useful for product. In all of those roles, if you go talk to people and you say, how would you want to guide your decision making? They want to do it from a profitable standpoint. They want to provide real value to the customer that captures market share and revenue for the organization, that produces more next year than we had this year. And CLV is a key to that. So how's it being done now? It's not being based on CLV. It's not being based on behavior. How do personas, which some organizations do have, like I said, UX teams usually always have this. Marketing teams more and more are starting to have this. Sales teams, not so much. Product teams might, but again, they're just using the UX designers. How do they create these personas? How do you look at your customer base and say, well, we're going to move beyond an average? Do we divide them up by gender? Do we divide them up by age? Do we divide them up by geolocation? Those are the typical first steps. I'm going to actually point out why that's just wrong. You should not be using demographics for these personas, not to develop them. Well, an example of how you could go do this right now, maybe you use HubSpot. Even if you don't, this tutorial is great as far as laying out a clear process and the kind of information you'd want to fill out for a persona. And what you will experience when you go there is it's pretty much templatized. You just have to fill it all out. So you have to know who they are. You have to know their title. You have to assign them a picture. You have to talk about their revenue or their vertical or their industry or their interests or their marriage status. This is where all the data from your customer profiles that we've talked about previously comes in. You have to fill it out. So how does this happen right now? You don't often have the information you need to complete these profiles. So people just guess. It's just total guessing. And it might be guessing based on some observational data. You've interacted with clients, you know your industry, you got a good sense. It's not going to be the kind of precision that you would get from using actual data, specifically behavioral data. And I call these math-based personas in part to immediately distinguish that they are not created by people sitting down, brainstorming, which is still better than nothing. It is better than nothing. But it's not the end goal. There's data that is available and data you can collect that will tell you who these groups are rather than you coming up with it off the top of your head. These are usually the result of formal rules, statistical rules. I'm going to talk about two statistical methods today, dimension reduction and clustering. But there's a formal process that information goes through to create the personas. And it has its own problems, it has its own limitations, but it is far better than just a few people guessing at this. Now, if you want them to be highly predictive, meaning they are very accurate descriptions of the subgroups of your customer base, which exist, they always exist. You have to base it on behavioral data. You can't base it, like I said, on demographics. You can't base it on self-reported information alone. You really want to understand the underlying patterns of how these individuals are making choices. Now, the Agile research method is the best way to do this. And Agile methods work because they keep you focused. They're highly responsive. So if you haven't heard of this method before, some of you I can see have been here to these lectures before, you've heard me many times make the case for Agile. And really, if you want to talk about what it comes down to as a decision, it's, do you want to make incremental progress every single day, or do you want to try to make large chunk progress in tiny, tiny time frames? And if you choose the Agile approach, you will find you are far more successful. The projects that try to take giant chunks out at once usually fail. We've said this before in the series. With data projects, it's 80%. It's 4 out of 5. Well, often they are using the, let's set some vague goals at the beginning and hope we get something out 8 months from now, 10 months from now, 12 months from now. Rather than, here's a very clear goal, we're going to work towards it for 2 weeks and assess what happens. Then we're going to work towards it for another 2 weeks and assess what happens. Or maybe we're going to work for a month and then assess what happens. But we are going to be constantly, during the process, stopping and assessing and then testing and validating. That is a far superior approach. That's why this lecture is based on, it says Agile in the title. These sprints will keep you focused, but they just guarantee that you make that incremental progress every single day. In fact, my family does have a dictum, my Italian family has a dictum, sempre avanti, which means always forward. And that is at the heart of the Agile approach. You just have to make incremental progress every day, and you're always improving. And you'll find that it keeps you far more focused. You don't chase things that don't matter. It's just a better approach. Now, I've laid out in a past lecture the exact detailed process with documents you can link to. You can see examples of secondary research sheets. You can see examples of customer conversation scripts. You can see examples of a survey. It's all laid out. The research process is laid out in perfect detail in that other lecture. If you go to the source that's there in the bottom left, you will have access to all of that. And research is great because you produce data that maybe other people could get if they did the exact same research, but it's pretty proprietary. It's unlikely that other people are going to know the same things you know as a result of that research. But you're also sitting on 10 times, 100 times as much observational data, meaning it already exists. It was machine-to-machine capture. It was generated, or human-to-machine capture, but it was generated without you having to structure something like a survey. You didn't have to go out and do the research. It's there. And you can use it. And there's this perception, we've encountered this many times at Emperitas. I think this is just people's inability to make this digital transformation smoothly. I just don't think that they think about this very much when it comes to data. But we hear it all the time that oh, don't look in that database, it's useless. You have to just say, thank you very much, I need to look at it anyways. Because you're going to get usefulness through the lens of that individual who probably doesn't have a great insight into that database to begin with, does not have a great insight into how that database fits into something like the entire customer journey, isn't an expert on data necessarily. And so if you are willing to push on that a little and say, thank you very much, I just need to look at it myself, you'll find all kinds of data that already exists that actually informs and helps your research. You should do this before you begin research. And the analytical process, because that data exists, it's different. Timing-wise, it's very different. It should still follow an agile system. Set up monthly or bi-weekly goals. Have stand-ups. Be talking about what's happening in real time. Don't just disappear into your offices or your open space with your headphones on and just work in isolation for 2 weeks or 4 weeks or 6 weeks or 24 weeks and then come back and see what happened. Be communicating in real time. You have to make that progress every single day. You can do that with analytics. You don't have to do research to follow this approach. All right, well, I said we would look at a template, and then I would talk about the data. Then I will get into the benefits. I'm sorry, I already covered the benefits. Then I will get into how to actually do it. So I'm going to show you a survey-based approach, so survey question, that you can use to do behavioral choice segmentations using clustering methods to find some of these personas and then map them back to things like demographics. But it's good to know what the end goal is. So look at, this is an example. If you want a copy of the image of this, it's available at that link in the bottom left. If you want the interactive PDF, so we have a PDF where under goals, for example, that information that's there right now, that's 3 bullets, are not filled out. You just fill it out. If you want that, just email me and I'll send it to you. But the purpose of this document, everybody in the company has this. We have 4 personas that we follow here at Emperitas. There's a 5th that's now emerging. We have this profile on those individual persona types with pictures that are usually from a real individual we've been talking to who represents that persona. We understand their goals, we understand their challenges, we understand their preferences, their likes and their dislikes. We understand every touch point that we have with that persona. We also understand the path that they've had in the customer journey, and then we calculate their customer lifetime value, both with a historical component and a future predicted component. And all that information is visible in the one sheet. This is your end goal. You have to have, and I love the UX team approach to this, by the way. In fact, this was based on what I saw with UX teams doing. It's like wanted signs in their development hubs, where they all, they each got cubicles, but then they've got some central area where they work together with whiteboards. I've seen them with treadmills in the room with the whiteboards. So they stand on the treadmill and walk while they talk. But they have this exact thing printed out, hanging around the room. Here's the 10 persona types we have using our product. Marketing has started to develop this as well, but I think they're following too much of a sales approach. And I think you could learn a lot if you're a marketer by looking at the UX approach. Because I think the UX approach gets closer to the idea of empathy of the individual, understanding them. This is where the challenges and the preferences really come in. And those are powerful things for individuals. Preferences are very predictive of behavior. And behavior is what I'm telling you should be basing these personas on. You should have a system to collect feedback about the usefulness of these personas. So if you share this, if you create it as the UX team or you create it as the marketing team and then you share it to the rest of the organization, have a system to collect feedback about whether this has been useful to the finance team, whether this has been useful to the ops team. They should have visibility into it. They should even have some influence on how it can be done. But you've got to collect feedback. Don't just make these, post them up everywhere and then think it's finished. It's not a one and done process. And so getting feedback from your team about they will see the changes, by the way. If you have good data, you'll see the change before those people see the change. If you don't have good data, people will see the change before you would see it coming. And if you have that system of feedback, those people will say, hey, this persona doesn't seem like it describes our customers anymore. It seems like instead this new group has been emerging. And you should expect that to happen. Customers are not static. The market is not static. It's all changing constantly. So to do this effectively, you've got to have a system. We've made this case in many of the other Dawn of the Day Data Age lectures that organization is not optional. 2 systems that we have talked about in particular are the 30-second rule. If you can't find something related to your research or your analytics in 30 seconds, it's not organized. It has to be organized if you're going to share it with people. And you need to share it with people because they need to guide their behavior on it too. And the second part is being focused. And we've talked many times about the SMART goals. You can go to that YouTube video. You can watch that lecture, follow it to the SlideShare link to get the slides. You can also just always email me and I will send you PDFs, high-res PDFs of these slides. Go there. There is a document example for you to fill out. It talks about DRIs, KPIs, milestones, measures of success. The kind of things that you need to agree upon before you go out and either do research or data mining. And if you look at today's required reading, which will come up on slide 28, There are 5 different methods there to choose from. 5 good methods to choose from. Most of the time, if you're here, by the way, today, it means that you have some interest in solving problems with data. That immediately differentiates you from 95% of people in your organization. And if you're really motivated, you're going to be the person that leads the charge to break down the data silos and start to use the data to guide decisions, to improve the efficiency of the organization, and you'll be the hero of your company if you succeed, but it's an uphill battle. Because right now, all the data that you would need to do any of this stuff, to really understand the wants and needs of the persona, to understand their customer journey, to calculate their customer lifetime value, all that information lives in different silos. You've got some of it in marketing, some of it in sales, some of it in product, some of it in customer experience, customer success. You will likely be the first person in your organization to propose breaking down these silos and putting it into some kind of central environment. That is not a small task, by the way. And I've talked about this quote before from the outgoing CEO of Cisco when he said 40% of businesses just going to die in the next decade. He might have even said only 40% will survive, so we'll have to go look it up. The point is, if you're not using data, according to a person who watches the infrastructure of IT, that's what Cisco's value prop was and is. If you're not watching that data and responding based on it, you will die as a company. Okay, that's a very fatalistic statement. And you're the pioneer who's saying, let's solve the problem by putting all of our data together. Okay, where? What kind of system is it going to be? Who has access management? This is a process you better be prepared to research on your own and understand before you dive into, but you can't do anything that follows without it. And the first steps are auditing what's there and inventorying what's there. And we talked about this in the customer touchpoint lecture last time. The link down there will take you to that. You get a lot of information in that process of hunting internally that helps you complete your SMART goals, helps you map the touch points, helps you audit and inventory the data, and start moving towards a system where data flows. This is one of the big problems that organizations have to solve in order to survive this digital transformation. Gone are the days where you could just download a CSV or do a report, a pivot table, and then call it good for the day. This information is too valuable. It needs to be understood in real time, and it can be understood in real time. But again, it can't if it's in silos. It has to be in some kind of central environment with very clear access management. Data is also really valuable. If you haven't paid attention to all the hacks, what do all these corporate hacks of the last 5 years have in common? People were after individual data. Sometimes that blackmail or exploit people, sometimes to understand customer preferences, sometimes to just catalog what humans are on the earth. It's all about data. You don't want to put all of your valuable information in one place and give everybody access. It requires some thought. Now, within that environment, dimensions are something that in the past lecture on creating customer profiles, we covered this. The dimensions are something that, looks like in the chat window, 40% of companies will die in 10 years. Thank you for the quotes, the people who threw that up. So 40% are going to fail because of this. 2 in 5. Because they can't figure out how to even organize their data into 4 dimensions and then give clear access to that data so people can use it to guide their decision making. And those dimensions that we've covered before, they're product-related things, usually about usage. They're price sensitivity. This is really important for you to understand. Price sensitivity is one of the things, if you don't know that right now, that is the best place you could go spend money as an organization to try to get a sense of where you are. Because the chances you're leaving a lot of money on the table that you're not capturing, that isn't real value that your customer gets, they would happily pay if maybe you could divide them into personas and price them differently with different products. And then there's marketing engagement. So much money is spent on getting out in front of customers. Is that effective? What channels are effective? This is attribution stuff. This is also messaging. What about the messaging about the product and the price is affecting the effectiveness? And then finally, all the stuff that CX teams do, mostly research, but their CX teams are starting to use more observational data that exists from things like the product itself. As far as these potential data sources that you could go to start your audit, I would go look for this kind of stuff as a beginning, and then just keep asking what other data sources people use. And this is a snowball sampling approach. You go talk to people who are in the know. You ask them about other people who are in the know. You move to those individuals. You ask them about other people who are in the know, and you slowly spread out and understand the whole network. There's some pretty common things to look for. Observationally, meaning you didn't ask somebody about it, wasn't self-reported. It could have been machine-to-machine capture. It could have been person-to-machine capture, but it exists already. Website data is a huge one. Behavior on the website. What blogs are they reading? What forms are they filling out? What's their site flow? How much time do they spend on page? How many pages are they looking at? What was their source of origin? Where did they come from before they hit the website? That's an environment where you can collect a huge amount of observational data. You can do the same thing with email. HubSpot has a great plugin that allows you to see when other people are opening your emails, and it tracks it all in your CRM. All that behavioral data is there. What about logins to an app? If you have a SaaS platform or you have a anything digital, logins, usage, events data, all of that is valuable observational data. And then social media posts, and this one and App Store reviews, I want to be clear, they're borderline cases. So is social media observational data because you see it and it existed without you? They put it on Twitter and so you can go look at it. Or is it survey if you tweeted at them and they responded? And the same thing with App Store reviews. Almost every app I've ever had is asking for a review. So if the review happened without asking, it's observational data. If the review happened because you asked, it's survey data. And this was explained in Interpreting Data Like a Pro. There are 4 broad ways in which you can define data. You should really understand those. You're not going to do personas effectively without understanding those. And one of them is the origin. Did it come from survey? Did it come from observation? Or did it come from experimentation? And so if you'll see, I've got some data under observation, but then I have survey and experiment together. And that's because it's unlikely you're going to do experiments where a construed environment where you create an office and you bring people into work in that office and you watch them and measure their behavior. It's more likely that you'll just ask them questions on a survey, but you might use experimental design, something like discrete choice modeling or something like the Divisor Differentials I'm going to show you today, to do an experiment through that survey. But almost every organization is doing customer satisfaction and NPS surveys. That is survey data you should definitely be including. And NPS, Net Promoter Score.
Oh.
Net Promoter Score. Yeah, the tyrant of CX metrics, as I've said in some of the other lectures and in the article I posted on LinkedIn about data differentiating your customer experience approach, how to actually use data for specifically customer experience stuff. I would say 90% of decisions are being guided by Net Promoter Score. It's a pretty good metric. It measures willingness to recommend. It values extremes. You can only be a promoter if you're a 9 or 10 on a scale of 0 to 10, which is 11 points. So you have to be at the high end to be considered a promoter. You can be a detractor if you're 0 to 6. You're on the giant low end of the other. And the idea is you want more promoters out there than detractors because they're making net recommendations which lead to more customers. And I think the HBR article that explains Net Promoter Score is called the one metric to grow your business. And NPS is great because it captures recommendation behavior. It doesn't capture any past buying behavior. It doesn't capture likelihood to make future purchase behavior. It doesn't include any cost of acquisition measurements. So it's a great metric. It's it pales in comparison to something like customer lifetime value that takes that all into consideration, including recommendations, because they are the most effective marketing channels, though. Okay. So we're back to this is what you need. If you've done this effort, if you've audited and you've inventoried and you've figured out what's available and you've started to fill holes in data, that's the other thing about data sources. Often they're there, 90% of it's empty. It's NA fields. How do you reduce all this data to the things that matter so you can fill out something like this example that works for you? It's pretty common in any persona development to have goals, challenges, sometimes they call barriers, preferences. It's the touch points, the customer journey, and the CLV that are going to take some extra effort on your part, but will add real value because this is how you guide profitable activity. So how do you do this based on behavioral personas? I said before, demographics are the worst thing to create a persona based on. If all you do is segment by age, gender, income, education level, geolocation, it's horrible. It is not a good, years of market research, decade now of market research, has taught me that they are the worst variables in the entire survey. And they have to be in there because everybody wants to look at them. And they are useful for platforms like Facebook, where you might be able to target based on those things, but you don't create the personas based on them. Choice is where you create the personas. And here's the key distinction. You make the personas based on choice, and then you look at their demographics, and there will be some predictable patterns. Just like there's predictable patterns about any of the other dimensions you want to look at. The difference is that the persona was built around how they're making choices, and then you looked at correlations to demographics for the purposes of targeting. But it's not because of their demographic that you're after them. It's because of the choices, the predictable choices that you can get from their behavior. If most data sets are NA values, missing values, you're talking about just garbage information. And this is where people have not been paying attention to this. Most organizations have not been investing lots of resources to make sure their data is in pristine condition and that people have clear rules and governance over it. And pretty much everybody is at the first stage of the data maturity steps, which is human reporting. You just download a CSV, which no one ever sees again, and then you do some pivot tables in Excel and you put them into a presentation and hopefully they transfer correctly, and then you show it in one meeting for 15 minutes, and that's about the extent of it. That underlying data is garbage 90% of the time, which means you have to start day one making progress on improving the quality because it is possible. Most of the NA fields are not because the data doesn't exist. It's because it's not been set up to collect correctly. It hasn't been populated, maybe from another variable that you have access to. It's just not quality information that you can immediately turn on and start using. You're going to have to use what's there. It's better than guessing, but from day one, you've got to start to improve this. And with behavioral data in particular, you should be asking yourself, are the patterns that I see in this data construed, meaning artificial? If somebody knows they're being watched, it is amazing how much it changes their behavior. So if you go to that link in the bottom left about the power of being watched, they did an experiment in an actual office, not with survey, where they put on the computer screen robot eyes watching people. They got 30% more work out of those people that they showed robot eyes than the ones that they didn't. People behave differently when they're watched. So something like events data, the app, they're probably not thinking every time they log into the app, oh, I'm being watched. So that's probably not very construed data. But when you do user acceptance testing with them, and you say, hey, we've got 5 tasks that we want you to accomplish, we're going to watch your screen while you do them, that is a construed environment. They're focusing way harder than they would be without you there watching. And behavioral data, you have to constantly assess this issue. You can't just take it and use it. You will make incorrect predictions because you don't understand some of these fundamental things, like once I'm watching them, that data that I collect through survey probably isn't as useful from a behavioral standpoint as what I'm getting from observational data because they know I'm watching. That's one way to argue that point. The other is actually you can get even better data through the survey. And I'm going to make that case. I'm going to show you an example of how you can do it. As far as analytical methods, there are really two. All the data that you're going to produce is going to come down to two analytical methods. And they can be used on small sample sizes. They can be used on, it doesn't have to be perfect data to start to use these approaches. One is dimension reduction, the other is clustering. So let's talk about each in particular. So with dimension reduction, the idea is I have 20 things, 20 possible KPIs that for this part of the customer journey with these touch points is very predictive. I know that it affects or captures the effects of what's going on here. But there's 20 of them. Which ones should I use? You could do the swag method and just pick a few. You could use your theory and what you've learned as an expert in your field and try to pick a few. Or you could do dimension reduction and you could say, within the 20, there's always about 5. 5 ways that these things move together. And then one variable is usually extremely high in predicting that 5. And so you just grab that 1 and 5, and let's get back to the Pareto principle and things we've talked about before. There's good mathematical reason to expect this. And you do what's called dimension reduction. You just use 5 now instead of 20. That's really efficient. What about clustering? How do we create groups? And we talked a little bit about this at the end of the Creating Customer Profiles lecture. But how do we create groups that internally, if you looked around within the group, you've got people who are just as absolutely similar as possible. But if you looked outside of that group at everybody else, they are so different. We're trying to capture real groups. And clustering is a great approach for that. So I said I would make the case that there's a survey approach that can be much more efficient than observational data, even though people are being watched. And they know they're being watched. This is not something Emperitas created. I want to give credit where credit is due. This is an updated, we put our own spin on it, but it was a method that we were taught, bequeathed even, to Emperitas by the modelers who were discrete choice experts in the world. I've talked about them before in some of our lectures and who no longer exist due to an acquisition. It is a survey-based experimental design, which means it has these assumptions, and you should assess whether you think these assumptions will hold. It is fine to use assumptions. People love to pick apart any sort of idea that is based on assumptions. You have no choice but to make assumptions. You don't know everything in the world. If they're good assumptions, and they're clear assumptions, then you can still assess the outcome based on those. And then you have to talk about what happens if we change some of these assumptions. But here are the 4 that are behind this survey approach. And you can do this in Qualtrics, by the way. There's a survey question type in Qualtrics called bipolar. You can use it to do the exact layout that I'm going to show you. So here's the 4 assumptions. This is self-reported data. So is the person lying? Do they just want the incentive? Do they want to just blast through? In that data differentiating your CX strategy, that's one of the things that I said. I critiqued CX data because so much of it is survey and so much of it comes from really, really bad panel companies that have just lowest dollar incentives, and you just get professional survey takers who figure out how to get through a survey fast to earn some fractional incentive. You got to cut those people out. They're not lying to you, or they're not confused. It could be that you didn't design your experiment clearly. You didn't explain it enough. They don't understand what's going on. They're not capable of answering you truthfully. So you have to assess both of those issues. Also, the choices that you present, they shouldn't be just random things. They need to be either totally mutually exclusive or very, very clear trade-offs. And the best way to understand this information is to get it from qualitative research, to do the customer conversations, and to figure out what are clear trade-offs from mutually exclusive things in their life. We do not allow fence sitting in this experiment. You can't be a middle person. So in NPS terminology, you can't be neutral. You're either a promoter or a detractor, and that's the only way that you're with us or against us. There's no fence sitting. There's 2 choices, and you have to decide which one you are more like or associate more with. And then the last assumption is that extremes are predictive of choice. And that's because most people do not prefer extremes. In fact, this is one of the assumptions of economic modeling in microeconomics, that you have a specific kind of shape of a function when you're talking about utility surfaces, because people don't prefer extremes. You don't want 80 cats and no food. You want one cat and some food. And yet we still see actual examples in the real world of people who will hoard anything. Cats are one thing that they'll hoard, but they're not the predictable, they're so uncommon that they get their own TV shows. Most people prefer one cat and some food. That's probably an okay assumption that people don't prefer extremes. Okay, so what happens when an extreme shows up? Is it scale usage bias? Is it indicative of the person's personality? We say that the assumption is that yes, an extreme position, meaning I say I'm exactly like this choice compared to this other choice, should be weighted higher in the analysis because it's more predictive of their choices. So those are the 4 assumptions. Here's what the actual experimental design looks like on a survey. And like I said, you can use the Qualtrics bipolar survey question type. You can put one choice on the left, one choice on the right. Choices are always presented in pairs. So choice 1A and choice 1B indicates that it was choice group 1, and then you had option A and option B. It doesn't matter if B or A is on either side of this. You can actually swap them. You can program Qualtrics to swap that stuff if you want to randomize it and make sure that that has no effect, because people do read left to right. It doesn't matter if choice 1B is on the left or choice 1A is on the left, because what you have are 2 choices with no neutral intermediary where you have to say, I am more like choice 1 or I am more like choice 2. Look at the scale difference analytically for having those extreme positions, meaning far left position or far right position. It's 5 times. It used to be 4 times, and we realized that we were underestimating it, so we've moved it up to 5 times. That's one of the additions that we made on top of what was bequeathed to us from the modelers. The extremes actually mattered so much more, 20% more, 25% more. So we changed that in the coding. Now, the person taking the survey, because this is always done through a survey, they just see 4 button options and 2 choices, and they're told to place themselves between those choices where they feel it best describes them. Now, here's an example of one, and I want to warn you, this doesn't necessarily work for you. This has worked with some of the groups that we've surveyed many times. The choice introvert, extrovert, clearly mutually exclusive. You're not either or. Or you're so marginal that we're going to force you to tell us which one you're slightly more like. Clear trade-offs to somebody. It's an easy one for them to answer, and you get a belief about their own interactions with society. It's worked out really well on a lot of different surveys. The other one that ironically has worked really well, but only with millennials, is Jedi Sith. You present on one side, are you more Jedi or are you more Sith? I don't know if that one's going to work for you. Point is, again, very clear, mutually exclusive choice pairs. Doesn't matter if we say Sith versus Jedi. We could flip the ends. They're going to tell us which one they're more like, and in that process, they'll put themselves on one of these 4 positions. And if they're extremes, it tells us a lot about them. And we're not after just one of these questions. So this is where you have to be, this is why you should use qualitative research to figure out we call them a battery of choice options that you're going to pull from. You might come up with 50 mutually exclusive, clear trade-off choice pairs from qualitative research, and you're going to have to pick. I do not advise asking more than 15 of those question types. Now, again, within Qualtrics, using the bipolar approach, you can do almost like a matrix where you present 5 of these choice pairs. So there's 10 choices, but they're presented in 5 pairs. But it's really easy for them because they keep seeing the 4 button options to just start picking, and they can answer 5 at a time. I do not recommend more than 5 at a time in that approach. Do not do 15 at once. That is one of the worst survey experience faux pas that people make, is putting everything in giant 1 page. Do it in groups of 5. You have 10 choices. And then from those, you will be able to figure out there are 5 of the 15 or 5 of the 20 that you use that are going to be highly predictive of the others. And in future surveys, you don't even have to ask 15, you can just drop down to 5. And those 5 will predict, classification models will predict with a very, very high hit rate. Sometimes this is also known as the hit ratio. So the successful prediction of a classification. You can do it based on 5 of these choice options if you find the right 5. But you found them by asking 15 or 20 to figure out how they make choices overall, not whether they're Sith or Jedi. It's about who they are as individuals given a whole series of choices and their behavior, the predicted behavior based on it. If you go through this effort, and this is a lot of analytical effort, this is something you will need a data scientist for. I don't think that you're going to successfully navigate this project if you have any other job. Even if you're a great stats person, you have another job that's going to slow you down so much that I don't think that you'll do this effectively. You should get a data scientist or a couple who have different roles, and one of them maybe being creating that central environment, so a data architect, the data guardian type, maybe a data wrangler to process all this information, get it flowing, get the analysis done. If you get flowing data, the next step beyond just looking at it once is you can start to use it for simulation. You can bring in game theory. This is the next lecture series, actually, is going to focus on the economics, all the economic theory that you could be bringing into your daily job that would help you significantly. One of them is game theory based on simulation. If we do this, what would they do? That's information you can measure on those 4 data dimensions about your market. And personas mathematically are identical in economics to the idea of representative agents. And those agents can be put into agent-based modeling. This is computer simulation. It says there are these equations that define individuals, maybe 5 different persona types. There are other rules or equations that determine how they interact with their environment, what the environment that they're interacting in is. And then you run simulations. Millions, billions of every random possible outcome, and you see the convergence. What are the common things that start to show up? That is a very powerful method. Almost no one is doing this right now. I'm just starting to hear, in fact, I think the earliest adopters of this, by the way, are going to be crypto companies. So we've experienced this at Emperitas, even ourselves, that crypto companies have been coming to us because of our ability to model businesses, which is what we do with CLV, and they've been saying, yeah, we actually want to take that a step further and model the entire economy of our cryptocurrency. We don't want to just model it, we want to do what the Fed does, Federal Reserve, and simulate and look at all possible outcomes. And then we want to match those against the hard reality of what's actually happening. They're leading the charge on this approach. And it's even within economics, there are very few economists who do simulation, but the ones who do, they can tell you like what will happen with a price shock, what will happen with a trade embargo. They'll plug it right into their model and you can watch it change. And there's assumptions to those models and you should understand those assumptions, but it is far more powerful than any just single predictive model. All right, so let's recap what we've covered, give you the required reading, and then show you, get you pumped for the next. I'm really excited for the next lecture. The next 2, actually. We've been doing these in pairs where we try to tackle a group topic, and the next 2 that we're going to is about how to bring economic principles into your business. CLV was the first one that we noticed businesses didn't have that comes from economics that they should. It's actually a whole series of things. And again, I think the crypto companies are the ones who are the wisest to this right now, that they want to model every part of their business. And it's all digital, so there's lots of observational data to do it. Well, how do you organize it? Why do you look at it certain ways? And this is where economics is by far the most superior lens through which you could look. And that's the next topic. All right, we went over the benefits of using personas, why you would go through this effort, personalization, the profit in personalization, you're providing real value, so you're getting real profit. We talked about templates. I showed an example of the Emperitas one. Again, if you want the PDF, interactive PDF version where you could fill out all that information yourself, please email me. However, just like with HubSpot, I will warn you, you got to have the information ready to fill it out. Maybe you have some of it, fill that out and start there. That's great. but you will have to have some of that information to start to complete it. It's not going to produce itself, which is different from math-based persona approaches. And then I talked about why those math-based personas should be built on behavioral data because it's so predictive, and ways that you could leverage either observational data that already exists about website behavior and app behavior and email behavior and CRM data versus a survey approach where you could really try to understand who they are as far as how they make choices, do some dimension reduction to find a couple that are highly predictive, build some models where you show those battery of questions, only 5 choice pairs, and you predict with 95% accuracy, 96% accuracy, which classification persona type they are, and then you have a visual that pumps out based on all that information. Here's who they are, their goals, their needs, where they are in their customer journey, their CLV, and it's just there available for everybody in your organization. If you are ready to make this leap, and it's a big leap, like I said, you're going to pioneer a lot of this. This is a great source. 5 guides for creating customer personas. So this individual, Spencer, lays out 5 different systems that you can use to start to do this. Templates, questions to ask, data sources to look at. There is a wealth of secondary information out there on the internet right now that can help you start this process. And you can link to that in the bottom left there. So what's coming up next? I said thinking like an economist. So this will be 2 parts. First will happen on June 7th. We will cover the broad levels of the pieces of economic theory that come in directly to organizational behavior and production within the company, all the things that, and customer insight, how you can use some of those frameworks and theories from economics to organize and look at some of the data you already have so you can make decisions that aren't just based, again, on the swag approach, but are based on data and some theory about why we would do X if we see Y. So that'll be on June 7th. And then there'll be a second one that goes into some of the more advanced methods following that. With that, we'll open up to questions. It looks like we already had one. Which of the five options from the required reading is your favorite? Number 2 is my favorite. And I cannot, off the top of my head, remember who the organization was that published it, but the title is How to Build Personas with Actual Real Life Data. And that one lays out a really good process. It links to a survey that was done of 1,100 individuals. I mean, it was a big sample, and 50% of them said that they were qualified to have had some engagement with a brand in the last, I don't remember if it was 60 or 90 days. And then within that window, they were then asked how well did the brand do, and 50% basically gave companies a failing mark. Like half of the people had a bad experience with one of the brands in that window that they were interacting with. And a lot of it was social, things that were trackable. So I like that one because it lays out a clear use case and a story and then gives you some hard guidance on what data you would need and how to start to organize it. I think this is like anything, though. You better look at all 5 of these and probably pick pieces apart from each of them. I think it's unlikely to expect that some other company's exact problem with a different market and a different customer, because if they were identical to you, you'd be a direct competitor, you'd be a commodity. So I think it's unreasonable to expect that given the differences in industry and customer types and all those other things that matter, that their problem perfectly captures your problem and you'll just be able to copy over wholesale whatever it is they did. Instead, I think it's, look at 5 examples, pick the pieces apart from them, just be organized, focus on those first principles, just be organized, just have the system, just be committed to making daily progress, just be transparent about it, just be visualizing what is being learned with everyone and getting their feedback on it. That's the stuff that's going to work. The pieces of those different 5 sources, just make a Frankenstein yourself. Okay. Other questions? You can unmute yourself, by the way. Okay, then we will see everybody on Thursday, June 7th for the next lecture in the Dawn of the Data Age lecture series. This page is live now. You can go register. If you want a copy of the slides today, you can get those on SlideShare. The video will be posted on our YouTube, and an email will go out next week that links to those things. Thank you for joining us. See you at the next one.